pshatim in the Gemara, when the pasuk says b'chareisha b'kasa tishbo, the Torah says that you have to go ahead and rest on the. So one opinion says it's referring to Shemitah. The seventh year you're not allowed to plow and you're not allowed to plant. That's one interpretation of the pasuk. There's another interpretation of the pasuk is referring to Shabbat. That on Shabbat you have to refrain. You can't plow and you can't plant on Shabbat. So there's a dispute in how to interpret this pasuk when it says 6 days you shall work and the seventh day you shall rest. Are we talking about 6 days of the week and the seventh day is referring to Shabbat? Well, the 6 days is referring to the 6 years of Shemitah. That's the and 6 years of Shemitah you shall work the field, and on the seventh year you should leave it fallow. And not work the land. So the Gemara said, according to the opinion that says the pasuk is referring to Shabbat, 6 days you shall work, the seventh day you should rest on Shabbat. You should not go ahead and plant and plow on Shabbat. So the Gemara says, the fact that the Torah compares harvesting, says in the same breath, it says you can't harvest and you can't plant right next to each other. Everyone, if you don't mind, if you could take this picture off, I should just press the other thing, take that picture off. So the Gemara said, the Torah says in the same breath that you cannot plant and you can't harvest. So now, thank you very much. That's much better. Thank you very much. So the Gemara said that the question is, what about, there's a mitzvah during the Omer, when you bring the Korban Omer, the second day of Pesach, as you know, there's something called the Omer. That's what we count. 50 days called Stirat Omer. We count 49 days from the time they bring the Korban Omer on the second day of Pesach. The Korban Omer, there was a special mitzvah to cut the barley and bring it into the Beit HaMikdash. And the Gemara says that we're allowed to even do that on Shabbat. You can even cut the barley on Shabbat. That's what the Gemara says. And the Gemara says, how do we know that? The Gemara says, because the case of the Torah that it says that you can't harvest is connected to the prohibition of you can't plow. Plowing, when the type of activity of plowing is an activity which is not a mitzvah activity. Plowing, you plow, it's a voluntary idea. The Torah never mandated you to plow. So when the Torah says on Shabbat you have to refrain from plowing, plowing is a non-obligatory act. It's not a mitzvah act. So if the Torah connects, I want you to refrain from plowing on Shabbat, and I want you to refrain from harvesting on Shabbat, the harvesting of the Torah that you're not allowed to do is similar to the plowing that you're not allowed to do. And what is that? A voluntary act. Just like plowing is voluntary, harvesting is voluntary. But if the harvesting would be a mitzvah, then you're allowed to do that on Shabbat. Because the only thing that the Torah is restricting on Shabbat is a harvesting, which is similar to a plowing, which means a voluntary act. But if it's a mitzvah act, you have a right to do that. If that act of mitzvah is able to be done on Shabbat. That's just like you could do Brit Milah on Shabbat, you could do a circumcision on Shabbat. In the Beit HaMikdash, you could slaughter animals on Shabbat to bring a korban on Shabbat. So too, the Torah is telling us that this mitzvah of harvesting in order to bring the korban omer is such an important mitzvah. It's so powerful that it even supersedes the Shabbat. Just like someone's sick and his life's in danger, you desecrate the Shabbat to save the person's life. Here the Torah says, I want you to do this mitzvah of cutting the barley in order to bring the korban at its proper time, and it happens on Shabbat. Is that clear, Jaime?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
Does the Gemara deal with the beginning of the pasuk with the words "you shall"? Is that a commandment to work on the sixth?
That's a very good point. I bet the commentaries on the Chumash will discuss your point. It does say the rabbis say, "Batala mevi yedechet." If a person does not work, if a person doesn't do anything, they are number one, doing nothing leads to sin. Number two is person needs to work, because if a person doesn't work, he's going to be poor, and he's going to be poor. He's not going to be able to. He's going to be busy his whole day and whole night. Not going to have time to be active in mitzvot and Torah if he doesn't work? What is he going to be doing? He's going to be running around collecting money the whole every day without have that, and he's going to be too busy with that without having time to perform his mitzvot and learn Torah.
I know teaching Torah is work, but what about just learning Torah all day long, kolelim and all that? Is that
That is work? It's because the pasuk says Adam la'amal yulad. A person was created to toil, and the question is, what toiling is that referring to? So it's referring to toiling in Torah. Now that person was toiling in Torah. So how does he support himself? So if there's a zvulan, we had Yisachar and Zvulan. So Yisachar was learning the whole day. What was Zvulan doing? Zvulan was going out to work, and Zvulan was supporting Yisachar. So as long as the kollel guy has the ability to have his bills paid, he has the right. It's an amazing opportunity. If he's being a kollel, he's learning, he's keeping the world going. But there needs to be a way that he's able to be supported. There needs to be a way. That's the.
Oskim Torah qualifies as the work if you have the support.
Exactly. 100%. Learning Torah is real work. It's a real toil. Just like a guy goes to medical school, he's working in medical school. He's in research. Learning Torah is a real work, but he needs to. That's Yisachar did that. That's what Travi Yisachar did. They were learning Torah. Okay, they also taught Torah, of course, but it's definitely considered a type of work. It's a real job. A person who learns Torah and kollel, the hours that they put in, the people put in, is real hours and real work. And the person who's dedicated to Torah, it's 60 minutes to the hour, 60 seconds to the minute. It's real work.
Thank you.
You're welcome. That's the partnership, right? But I think, Jaime, your observation is a very beautiful idea, that you see that the Torah gives it in the positive point, work for 6 days. That means you need to know that life, you have to be active. You have to be actively engaged in life and work. You have to identify what type of work, teaching Torah, studying Torah, or other type of work you have to be involved with. And that's what a person needs to know. We're not here in this world just to sit back, relax, and just do nothing. We have to know that we need to be productive, and we have to figure out how we're going to be productive, what way. But we need to be active. That's the maybe that's the pasuk is alluding to that point. So the Gemara says, the Gemara said, how do you know that that plowing is not a mitzvah? Maybe when you're plowing for the karban, you're plowing for the omer. Good morning, Mr. Haber. Plowing for the korban omer. If you plow for that for the purpose of having that crop, so that
morning, Rabbi.
Morning, Yosef. So therefore, maybe plowing would be a mitzvah in that case. So and yet the Torah says you have to refrain from plowing on Shabbat. So therefore, when the Torah says you have to refrain from plowing on Shabbat, maybe it refers to even a plowing, since there are different types of plowing. So maybe it's even referring to that type of plowing, a plowing of mitzvah. You also have to refrain from on Shabbat. And if that's the case, so when the Torah says you have to refrain from harvesting, similar to plowing, if plowing would even refer to a mitzvah, because there is such a plowing that's a mitzvah plowing for the purpose of the korban. So when the Torah says, I don't want you to cut the barley, maybe it's also referring, when the Torah says, I don't want you to harvest on Shabbat, it should also be referring to even mitzvah. That was the Gemara's question yesterday. And the Gemara says, since if you found the field plowed, you don't need to go ahead and plow it to do the mitzvah of the korban. Plowing is not an integral part of the mitzvah of the korban of the omer. It's not that you need to plow in order to fulfill this mitzvah. That's not the mitzvah, is not to plow. The mitzvah is to bring the korban. So therefore, the Gemara says the case that we don't, plowing itself is not identified as a mitzvah per se. And therefore, when the Torah says, I don't want you to harvest, it's talking about a harvesting similar to the plowing, which is a voluntary type of act. But if it was a mitzvah act, you would have to go ahead and you would be allowed to desecrate the Shabbat for harvesting of the korban omer. So the Gemara had just brought a question. That's what we were up to yesterday. 4 lines before the white lines on 8B2. 8 Rava, Ravina Rava. You have it? 8 Ravina Rava. 8B2. Ravina asked Rava the following. Yatz ha'av hamakes beno. We said that a father who hits his son, or a rav harodes tamido, or a rabbi who disciplines his student, or shliach bezdin, or the agent of the court, if they were involved, the agent of the court, let's say, was giving lashes to the person. And if any of these 3 scenarios, the person got killed inadvertently, we said in those 3 cases, the person who killed the person unintentionally does not go to exile. The father doesn't go to exile if he disciplined his child, and the rabbi doesn't go to exile if he disciplined the student and the student died. Obviously, we're not talking about overly excessive hitting. We're talking about something which was not expected the person should die in such a situation, but maybe he could have been a little extra careful, but he wasn't really negligent. In any of those 3 cases, we say that he does not go to exile. And the Gemara says, why don't you go to exile in those 3 cases? Because those 3 cases, the Gemara says, is a mitzvah. You're performing a mitzvah when the father is hitting the son, disciplining the son, or the rabbi disciplining the student, he's involved in a mitzvah. So we said, if you're involved in a mitzvah, because the Torah's case, if the Torah says you go to exile, is when you're not involved in a mitzvah. When you're chopping wood is not a involvement in a mitzvah. But if you'll be involved in a mitzvah, you will not go to exile. So the Gemara says, why do we identify those cases as a mitzvah? Why do you identify the father hitting the son as a mitzvah, or the rabbi hitting the student? The same way you said that if you found the field plowed, there's no mitzvah for you to go ahead and plow that field in order to get to the final product of the Omer Karban. That means it's not an integral part of the mitzvah. It's maybe we call it a preparatory for the mitzvah, but it's not the mitzvah itself, the plowing, because you don't need to have to plow to do the mitzvah. You need to just have you need to bring the Karban, you need to bring the barley, but the plowing is not something that the Torah is instructing you to plow. So the Gemara's question is, so too, when it comes to a student, the Torah instructs the obligation, the fact that you could go, what's the idea? The Torah wants the child to be on the right derech, to do the right thing in life. If you need to go ahead and discipline the child to get him onto the right derech, good morning, then you have to go ahead and discipline the child. If you need to go ahead and hit the child, fine, that will put the kid on the derech. But what's the mitzvah? The mitzvah is that the child should go ahead and do the right thing. That's what needs to be done. Sometimes he needs help to do what he needs to do in life. So therefore the fact that the Torah is not telling you hit the child. The Torah doesn't tell you need to go ahead and hit the student. The Torah tells you the person needs to do the right thing in life. And if you don't need to hit the child, you don't need to hit the student, you should talk to the student and talk to the child and get him to do what's right. Therefore, there's no mitzvah to hit him in such a case. So hitting is not part and parcel that the Torah is giving you the Torah is not instructing you that you should be done. That you have to hit the kid. It's only under certain circumstances you need to hit the kid. That's the Gemara's question. So the Gemara's question is, if that's the case, so why do we look at the hitting of the child why do we label it as a mitzvah to the effect that he's going to be off the hook if the kid gets killed during that act? You should the same way you look at the plowing of the field. You don't identify it as a mitzvah because it could be done. It's not something that you have to do. You have to plow. Someone else could plow in order for you to do the mitzvah. So if this mitzvah could be accomplished of the child being on, if the child would take the lesson without hitting him, you don't need to hit him. So why? So therefore, we should categorize that as a prep to a mitzvah, to enable a mitzvah to be performed. But we shouldn't look at it as a mitzvah itself, because it's not that you need. It's not something that has to be done. So why? And yet the Mishnah categorizes the hitting of the child as a mitzvah. So too, we should categorize the plowing of a field as a mitzvah too, because since sometimes you need to plow when no one plowed the field before, and you need to plow in order to bring the korban, so we should categorize it also as a mitzvah. So that's the Gemara's question. In short, the Gemara's question is, if you told me, but when it comes to Makkos, when it comes to child, you told me that the hitting is considered a mitzvah, even though the mitzvah could be, even though you're not obligated, you don't have to hit the kid. So too, we should say the plowing of a field, even though it also should be categorized as a mitzvah. Because even though you might not need to plow, someone else could have done it for you. The guy could have plowed the field. But at the end of the day, the job needs to be done. It needs to be plowed. And no one plowed it. You have to plow it. So we should categorize it also as a mitzvah. And if we categorize the plowing as a mitzvah, so then when the Torah says you should not plow on Shabbat, it's talking about both a mitzvah plowing and there's other plowing that's not, even a mitzvah plowing you have to rest from. And therefore, when the Torah says you have to refrain from harvesting, it would be even a mitzvah harvesting you would have to refrain from, which would mean you would not have a right to cut the Omer on Shabbat. And that's the Gemara's question. Why is it that you're telling me you have a right to cut the Omer on Shabbat? Because you're telling me that the case of the Torah that is telling you that you can't cut is only something similar to plowing, and plowing is a voluntary act. Harvesting is a voluntary act that the Torah is forbidding on Shabbat, but if it's a mitzvah act, you can. But the Gemara is saying, no, we should categorize plowing as a mitzvah act, the same way we categorize the hitting of the child as a mitzvah act. That's what the Gemara's question was. So what did the Gemara, that's what the Gemara says. Lema, kivan de ilu gamir. Should we say that if the child would learn his lesson without being hit, it would not be a mitzvah to hit the kid? So hashtanami lav mitzvah. So too, now that you have to hit the kid, we shouldn't categorize it as a mitzvah if it's not a must, because it could be accomplished without hitting sometimes. So the Gemara says, Hatam, the Gemara says, Afal gav the gamir, even though the son gets the lesson, sometimes you want to give the kid a lesson. And you talk to him and you tell him, you teach him that lesson about, let's say, what he needs to improve in life. But even though he will take the lesson without hitting him, right? Let's say the child did something, and you could teach him the lesson to be a better boy without hitting the kid. But yet there's nami mitzvah ka'avit. It's still a mitzvah to give a kid some discipline, even though technically the kid did something. Right, but here the Gemara is saying, when I say discipline, we're referring to hitting. It's a mitzvah. Now, what obviously it has to be, like I said, my father said, when my father hit me, what did my father say? It hurts him more than it hurts me. And he meant it. Meaning we're talking about a discipline of love, a hitting of love. And the point of hitting the child is to one of the comments I say is to humble the kid. It's very important that a kid be humble. You humble a child at a young age. He'll get a feeling of what it means to be hit. He'll also realize that, you know what, you have to be extra careful not to go the wrong path.
Rabbi, today they put you in jail.
Today, what do you say? They put you right, exactly. What? Say it again. Right, exactly. Yeah. Good morning. But you know, there's a great story. Jaime, there's a great story. What was the story? The story goes that a kid called, his father hit the kid, and the kid calls, the kid maybe He sees all these advertisements. So he calls ACS. He calls one of these family services, and they come to check the kid out. And they check the kid. They look him over, and they see he's fine. It wasn't the father didn't abuse the kid in any way. The father, whatever. So after the ACS left, he says, "Now you're really gonna get it. Now you're really gonna get it. Whatever the joke is, something like that." But of course, people have to be careful. It's not allowed to be overdone. There's no question about it. But also, we find in the Gemara that this is an important thing for a kid, and I believe that if you look at the children of this generation compared to the children of the last generation, I believe the last generation, the children that have gotten hit properly. I'm not talking about excessivity. Children that had gotten proper discipline, everything out of love, everything only to help the child, to train the child to do the right thing. You see, it's a different type of generation because the children were more humble. I might get my, I have to say it the way it is. That's how I feel. People, yes, the Gemara right now. The Gemara brings a pasuk. Mr. Haber is very interested in this. He's interested in always in everything that we say. Look here, the Gemara brings a pasuk. Tiksiv. Yaseh bincha. The Gemara brings a pasuk. This is a pasuk from Mishlei. That's a different pasuk. This pasuk says, Yaseh bincha. Let me find the pasuk over here. Mishlei. Yaseh bincha. Hit your child. V'yanichecha, and he will bring you rest. Then you'll be able to relax. When you get older, you'll have rest. You'll have nachat. You'll have an easy life if you discipline your child. But people don't hit their child, who never put them into place properly. Those people those parents are not going to be rested. They're going to have trouble later on when the kid gets older, because the kid, he knows no bounds. He hasn't never been disciplined properly. We ever hear of the expression people that spoil their children in a way, not just financially, they spoil their children, they never really said anything, they never really disciplined the child. So that's what the Gemara says. And obviously if the Gemara says it, it's true. But the key, like I said, is only it's done out of love. A normal parent, they hit the child, am I right, Mr. Batesh? It's only 100. It's 100 only out of love. If they're normal, if they're not normal, then it's a different story. We deal with normal people. The Pasuk Shlomo Melech is not talking about not normal people. It's talking about normal people who have proper feelings, who act properly, or control themselves. They're not hitting the child to get out their own frustrations. They're hitting the child because the child needs to be, to be humble. Okay. Hada Amar Rava. Rava said, Lav milsihi de amri. He said, I could have said even better, he says. He says, Sira dumya de harisha. He said, the pasuk says you have to refrain from harvesting on Shabbat. And it's right next, and it compares it to plowing. Ma harisha motza harush o necharesh. By plowing, if you found it plowed, you don't need to plow. Afkasira, so when the Torah says you have to refrain from harvesting on Shabbat, there's also nami katsur ena kotzer. And when the Torah says you cannot harvest on Shabbat, it's referring to a similar type of situation. That if matzur katsur ena katsur, it's talking about a voluntary type of harvesting. The Isal Kadaitach mitzvah, because if you think, meaning the same way that when the Torah says about plowing, the plowing of the Torah is a voluntary act, so too the case of harvesting is also a voluntary act. The Isal Kadaitach mitzvah, if you think that the case of the Torah, if you think it's talking about mitzvah, so matzah kotzeh ina kotzeh, can you say, would you say by Morning Daniel, would you say by harvesting, if you found something harvested, you do not need to harvest when it comes to the Omer. The Omer, if you found it already cut, you still have to cut, right? The case of the Torah, when it comes to the Omer, even if you found something cut, when it comes to plowing, if you found the field plowed already, you don't need to plow again in order to bring the Korban Omer. But therefore, the case of the Torah, when the Torah says you need to refrain on Shabbat from plowing, it's talking about a type of activity that is not a mandatory type of activity. Because you don't have to plow if you found the field plowed before. If you want to bring the Korban Omer, if you found a field plowed, do you have a mitzvah to plow? No. There's no obligation to plow the field if you already have a plowed field. However, therefore, the case of the Torah that says that you're not allowed to harvest is also a similar type of activity. A harvesting that's also similar, that's a voluntary act. But however, harvesting of Omer is something that you have to do. The Gemara says, mitzvah, if you think the pasuk is talking about mitzvah, motza kotzer in a kotzer, are you telling me if you found a field that was already harvested, are you going to tell me there's no mitzvah to harvest the barley? You still have a mitzvah. The pasuk cannot be telling you, I'm talking about a harvesting that's of the Omer. Why? Because mitzvah l'ksar. There's a mitzvah to harvest even if you already have the grain. Even if someone already cut the barley. Let's say a guy cut the barley. You still have a mitzvah to cut the barley. So since the case of the pasuk is talking about something that you do not have to do, because plowing is something that you do not always have to do. If someone else plowed, you don't have to plow. So too, the harvesting is, when the Torah restricts you from harvesting on Shabbat, is a harvesting that's not an obligatory harvesting, similar to the plowing, which is never found to be an obligatory plowing. Because plowing, you don't have to. If you found it plowed, you could just go with it. But something which is an obligatory type of act, which is like harvesting, there's a special mitzvah to harvest the barley, so that could be done on Shabbat. So that's how the Gemara concludes. Now we're getting back to Makkos regarding someone who kills somebody. Ha'av gola aydi ben. Now the Mishnah says that if a father kills his son unintentionally, the father will go to exile. Now the Gemara is going to ask, we're on the Mishnah now on Chet Amud Beis, 8b. The Gemara is going to ask, this would seem to be in a contradiction to what we had in the Gemara Mishnah before. The previous Mishnah stated that if a father, when he's disciplining the child, on 8b, the previous Mishnah stated, in one of Yosef Tzaddik, the previous Mishnah stated if the father is hitting the child and the child passes away, the father does not go to exile. That's what the previous Mishnah said. Because we said the father's involved in a mitzvah, and the father's involved in a mitzvah, and he kills the son, chas v'shalom, he does not go to exile. And this Mishnah says the opposite. This Mishnah says that the father goes to exile if he kills the son. The Gemara is going to ask, why is it that over here we say he goes to exile, and there we say he doesn't go to exile? That's going to be the obvious contradiction. Ha'av goleh al yidei haben. Very good. So that's what the Gemara is going to answer. So here what Yaron says, the Gemara is going to answer, there's different types of cases. The case of the previous Mishnah was when the father, he was doing a mitzvah, because like the Mishnah earlier said, that was saying that the father hitting the son is a mitzvah act. Correct? That was what the Gemara said before. But this Mishnah is talking about a case where it wasn't a mitzvah act. It wasn't such a mitzvah, it was some other type of activity that was done and the child passed away. And therefore the father would go to exile, like Yaron says. And then the Mishnah continues. if the son kills the father unintentionally, also the son would go to exile. The Mishnah continues, Hakol golin al yidei Yisrael. Everybody goes to Golut if they kill a Jew. So who is the Gemara is going to identify who is the everybody, because Goyim don't go to Golut. If a non-Jew kills a Jew, the non-Jew does not go to exile. That's not the punishment to killing a Jew. So what is the Hakol Golin coming to tell us? The Gemara is going to say, let's say you have an Evet Kanani. Let's say someone has a slave that he bought, it was a Gentile that he bought, and then he becomes an Evet Kanani. He goes to the mikveh, he accepts the mitzvot, he gets a Brit Milah. That Evet Kanani, that slave, is obligated in mitzvot like a woman. That Evet Kanani. So that Evet Kanani, or let's say we're going to see about the Kutim, but we'll just focus on Evet Kanani. If the Evet Kanani kills a Yisrael unintentionally, he will go to exile. The Evet Kanani will go to exile, will go to Golut. That's what the Gemara is going to say. It's one of the people that the Mishnah is coming to add. Hakol, everybody, even that Evet Kanani would go to Golut Ayde Yisrael. The Yisrael Golin Ayidehen, and the opposite is also true. If the Yisrael killed the Evet Kanani, he would also go to exile. If the Jew kills a guy, the Jew doesn't go to exile. But the Evet Kanani is not a status of a guy. The Evet Kanani, as long as he's a slave, he's obligated mitzvahs like a woman. If the master dies and there's no children to inherit the slave, if the slave, or let's say if the master sets him free, then he's obligated in all the mitzvahs, the Evet Kanani. No longer like a woman, he's obligated in all the mitzvahs like a man. This man is Evet Kanani. So this Evet Kanani, if he kills a Jew, he also goes to exile. The Evet Kanani goes to exile. Okay? Works both ways. Then the Mishnah says, Chutz mi ger toshav, except a ger toshav. Now, what does a ger toshav? Ger toshav is someone, in order to live in Eretz Yisrael, the Jewish community, the goyim people would have to accept upon themselves the 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach. That's how some explain the ger toshav, and some say they just have to accept upon themselves not to worship idols. So ger toshav, we'll translate it for now, he accepts upon himself to keep the 7 morning mark, to keep the 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach, to keep that he's not going to worship idols, he's not going to murder, he's not going to steal. He accepts upon himself those mitzvot, and that's called the ger toshav. And there's even a mitzvah to support such a, to give tzedakah to such a person who accepts upon himself in Eretz Yisrael to keep the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach. So that ger toshav, if that ger toshav kills a Yisrael, so he will not go to Golut. We're going to see more about how to translate these words of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, except the ger toshav. So there are 2 ways to read this word, except. Is the exception that if the ger toshav kills a Yisrael, he does not go to exile? Or is it referring to if the Yisrael kills him, the Yisrael doesn't go to exile? Is the ger toshav the one who's committing the act, the perpetrator of the act? Or is the ger toshav the one who is the victim of the act? So Rashi, the way Rashi reads it in the Mishnah, we'll have to see more in the Gemara. He's reading it that the ger toshav is the victim. She'ein Yisrael, Rashi says, Gola al yado. The Yisrael, the Jew, if the Jew inadvertently kills the ger toshav, the Jew will not go to exile. That's Rashi's translation over here. We'll have to see more in the Gemara. Then the Mishnah says, the ger toshav ina goleh el al yedei ger toshav. Morning. A ger toshav.
Can't hear you, Rabbi.
You don't hear us, Mr. Ashby? 1 second. Maybe we got to make the volume a little louder over here. It's 1 second, Mr. Mr. Adji, we're going to try to,
It's not the volume, it's just
okay.
you have to put it.
How do you know the volume's at its highest?
You do.
Oh, you check.
No, but the volume is for you to hear. That's for you to talk.
Okay. So the Gemara is, Mr. Adji, do you hear me now?
I hear you.
Okay, very good. So the Gemara says, "V'ger toshav eina goleh." She said, he's not. Okay, one sec. We have our technician who's trying to fix the volume, Mark. Okay. Okay. V'ger toshav eina goleh el ayidei ger toshav. A ger toshav, this Gentile who accepted the 7 mitzvahs of Bnei Noach, the only time he's going to go to Golut if he kills another ger toshav. If the ger toshav, according to this translation of the Mishnah, if the ger toshav kills a non-Jew, the ger toshav will not go to exile if he kills a non-Jew, and the ger toshav kills a Jew, the ger toshav will not go to exile. The case that the ger toshav will go to Golut if between him and another ger toshav. If he kills another ger toshav unintentionally, welcome back, Mr. Shetrit. If he kills another ger toshav unintentionally, he will go to exile. He will go to Golut for that. Okay. So now the Gemara, the job of the Gemara is to explain the Mishnah. The Mishnah stated that if a father inadvertently kills his child, the father goes to exile. That's the statement of this Mishnah. In contradiction to the previous Mishnah that says that if the father hits his child and kills the child, the father does not go to exile. He's not going to go. Okay, so we have to show that there are different cases. That's going to make the difference. So the Gemara says, "Ha'av golai ben." You're telling me that the father goes to Golut as a result of killing the child. Via Amrat, you told me Yatza Ha'av. You told me Hamakes Beno. You told me that the father who hits the child if he's involved in a mitzvah, this father does not go to exile if the child gets killed inadvertently, unintentionally by the father. So the Gemara answers the Gamir. The case of this Mishnah is that the son did not need to get hit. The kid was not involved in a mitzvah, the Gemara says. Why? Because the kid knew the lesson. He knew what he needed to do. And the father hit him, and it was not necessary. So therefore he goes to exile. The father was not doing a mitzvah. If the father's doing a mitzvah, the kid is not getting the lesson. He's not listening properly. But here he got the lesson. He got the lesson. You spoke to him and he got it without you hitting him. So if that's the case, so you didn't have to hit him. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? You told me you told me even if the kid gets it when you talk to the kid, there's still a mitzvah. Mr. Shetrit, we said there's a mitzvah for a parent to hit a child, to discipline a child out of love, to humble the kid, to make the kid, as we say in Ashkenaz, a mensch. To put the kid to recognize, to bring him to know his place in life, to be able to do the right things in the future. Even if he's a good kid. Now, that means to say you're not just hitting, but you're not, let's say, no, again, the point of Jake, the point is, the kid did something wrong. It was probably a me. Yeah, but I think, Jake, the point is, if there's some way the father could have it's not that the kid did it. There's always something that a kid does that you can find something to do something. No, no one is perfect. Every kid, even the perfect kid is not perfect. But there's some kids that you could go ahead and get the message across. There's some kids that are not perfect, Jake, but to get the message across, they don't need to get, you definitely might not need to hit the kid to get the message across. But the Shlomo HaMelech is saying, the kid who is a very good kid, and you could get the message across sometimes without hitting him, to spill a mitzvah to hit that kid. Again, it has to be done properly, with love, and so on and so forth. And that's going to keep the kids, like I said before, look at this generation, look at the previous generation. And not just the kids. No, the kid did something wrong, and you could tell him what you did wrong without hitting him, or you could tell him what he did wrong by hitting him. So you better to tell him what he did wrong. That doesn't say how many times he needs to do this lesson, but better to tell him what he did wrong by hitting him, in order that the kid will be humbled. And if he'll be humbled, he'll be a different type of person, and he'll stay on the straight path in life. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you, Jaime. Welcome back, and Akiva, welcome back.